Hello and welcome to Live at 525 with Vermont Interfaith Action. My name is Debbie Ingram and I'm the Executive Director of VIA. And we are a group of over 70 member and affiliated congregations throughout the state of many different faiths who come together to use a community organizing methodology to try to effect systemic change on issues of social justice. So our topic for today is, we're calling it mass evictions, which maybe sounds a little bit scary, but it should, because this is something unusual and really kind of terrible, we think, that's happening in Vermont. So my guest for today is one of our very active and very knowledgeable volunteers. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Roth. I'm a member of the VIA Committee on Affordable Housing and Homelessness. I'm also a member of Temple Sinai and the Social Action Committee at Temple Sinai. I live in South Burlington.
Great. Yeah, thanks for being with me today, Amy. And we're going to have an interesting conversation, I think, and hopefully share some information with folks and also help them to understand how they might get involved if they are so moved from what they hear from us, right? So just to kind of give folks background, first of all, wanted to say that during the pandemic here in Vermont, the state provided temporary shelter for unhoused individuals and families. Now that, of course, we've been doing that even before the pandemic, but we actually expanded the eligibility because we got additional federal funds, and we were able to house even more precariously housed people than we knew existed really in Vermont. We discovered through the pandemic that there were more people. So for almost 3 years now, we have temporarily housed around 4,000 Vermonters, and most of this has been done in motels and hotels throughout the state. But we've had the opportunity to talk to people who've lived in these motels, right, and people who've run programs all over the state. And Amy, can you tell us a little bit about what we've heard about what these motels have been like?
Sure. So the motel program has been, it just, expanded dramatically. It's cost about $6 to $7 million per month. It's been run by the Department for Children and Families, although not in a very coordinated fashion, because it was all, with these emergency dollars and under emergency conditions around COVID. So there really hasn't been very good oversight. There's been, a real mix of conditions, living conditions for individuals in these motels, and a lot of issues. It certainly has kept, a roof over many people's heads who otherwise would not have had that. But it has not been ideal, clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have. Yes, heard mixed reports, right?
Yeah.
Now, who was eligible during the pandemic? They expanded eligibility, right?
Yes, they expanded eligibility, so it was a much broader swath of individuals than were typically found eligible to access emergency housing in Vermont. So some of the criteria include individuals who are victims of domestic violence, families with children under the age of 18. That was expanded. Typically, it was just families with very young children. Individuals who have significant mental health challenges, people with disabilities and health problems, people who are age 60 and older, and you must have an income at or below 185% of the federal poverty level. So it's not every single person who has who has housing concerns, and difficult housing conditions, but it certainly expanded. Persons who are pregnant too, and people who are victims of natural disasters.
Okay, right. Okay, great. So that's why the numbers went up to about 4,000 people, right? Because the eligibility was expanded.
Right.
Yeah, we've heard some other things too about the program, right? Would you say that it has been stable and reliable the way it's been administered by the state for these people?
No, because there's just been, insufficient staffing resources to provide, the kind of oversight, to provide case management for individuals, to help people with their planning for transitioning to more stable circumstances. We've heard some horror stories about some places where owners of the hotels and motels really were taking advantage of folks and charging the state exorbitant prices. So it's been, and plus, of course, it was going to be, the administration was going to cut it off a few different times at different junctures during the pandemic. And then it would get, so people would be, obviously quite anxious about what was going to happen with them. And then it would be reinstated because there would be an uproar. So again, it's been, a roof over folks' heads. Some people have certainly been able to make the best of their circumstances and try to find employment or try to set themselves up, but it's been very uneven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where VIA has come in, right? You mentioned that several times. The state has said that, we're running out of money and we're going to have to send people out of the program. And, folks in our congregations, right, have been really upset about that. And it is very traumatizing, of course, to people if any of us put ourselves in that position. If you heard all of a sudden, you're not going to be able to live where you're living, you've only got maybe 3 weeks left or even, a couple of months. So you start kind of frantically looking for a new situation. And then there's a big uproar, though, and from folks like us at VIA, and then the government goes, oh gosh, okay, well we can find a little bit more money, so you can stay longer, and then you relax, right? And so people have gone on this roller coaster ride up and down over these last 3 years, right? Yeah, and it would be traumatizing for anybody, I think. Yeah.
And I think we have to think about also just the broadness of this population, because we're not just talking about individuals who are chronically experience, not having a home, but we're also talking about individuals who, something threw their circumstances over the edge during the time of COVID and pandemic, and so they were, suddenly experiencing homelessness, and that happened for a good number of people, who lost their jobs, because we know that so many of our folks in our communities are just 1 or 2 paychecks away from not being able to pay their rent or their mortgage.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So during that time when the state kept changing its mind, right, we had a couple of different press conferences to try to shine light on that. And one of the things we kept asking for was a comprehensive plan, right, to use this time when we did know that we had federal funds coming in to think ahead and say, what's going to happen when the money runs out, which we all knew that would eventually, right? And we met with various players in the government. We never were able to get a meeting with the Secretary of the Agency of Human Services, who's kind of really the highest ranking official other than the governor himself in charge of this. Although I will say that we did find out today that we do have a meeting with her, so we're glad for that. So we'll talk with her. But we also did things like some of our allies. We supported work that they did, like Brenda Siegel and Josh Leesenby. Did a camp out at the State House to draw attention, right? So we've been, anyway, we've been in this for a while, right? So
yeah.
So what's the, sometimes you'll hear actually from the legislature and the governor that they've been doing all kinds of great things around affordable housing in the state. What are they referring to when they say that?
Well, because of, this is perceived as a crisis, and I think there have been a lot of legislators who have perceived it as a crisis, and I think there are folks within the administration, within the governor's administration, who recognize, the dire circumstances. But, and so there has been more money allocated in this upcoming budget for the next fiscal year, I think close to $300 million, which is considerable amount, but most of it is targeted to creating more long-term housing, so permanent buildings, and that means actual construction or the rehab of older buildings, or existing buildings, in order to create units for people, affordable housing for people. And that's really excellent. Excuse me. But of course, that doesn't just materialize overnight. It can take, months, if not years, to get all of that in place. So that's very problematic, because this motel program that's been funded with these additional federal dollars is coming to an end. And what is going to happen to all of these folks in the meantime, in the interim? They're just not going to have any place to be, and that puts them in grave jeopardy.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that, because we're grateful that, and we did some advocacy work with the legislature and the governor to try to make sure that they did use a lot of federal money coming into the state for the construction and the rehab of affordable housing, permanent housing, as you say. Here we are in a position where can't just snap your fingers and say it's going to happen overnight. And so what we're asking for really at this juncture is a stopgap measure. We're not asking to, for the next 30 years, house 4,000 Vermonters who are precariously housed. We're asking for until these new units of construction can come online, just not to send these folks out into the street for a temporary period of time, right? Yeah. So this is the juncture that we're in now, right? So the administration intends to return the emergency housing program to pre-pandemic eligibility. Right. This means that people have to be certified. It's a lengthy process for their disabilities, whereas it was a little bit easier for them to qualify with chronic illnesses before. And then only children 6 and under can qualify instead of children 18 and under. So we're looking at 9 and 10-year-old children out with their parents, couch surfing or in their cars or who knows where, right? And so this is where we are with the FY24 budget. Now, the motels, none of us are going to praise the motel program. I mean, you've already pointed out, some of the problems with it. But the motel owners, some of them have been charging what we would consider to be exorbitant rates. I mean, what they would get, market rates really for tourists coming into Vermont. Right. And the administration doesn't seem to have done anything to negotiate lower prices. So that's been a source of consternation for quite a while. So now what we're told, though, is that with the new eligibility rules and the lack of money to pay these exorbitant rates, what's going to happen is 1,000 households will lose their eligibility at the end of May, at the end of this month, and then another 800 households will lose it at the end of June, right, for a total of, so that's about 2,500 people, 1,800 households, 2,500 people, including children.
And for the state of Vermont, that's a huge number of people. That's a town. Right. That's a town in Vermont. So just for people to sort of conceptualize, what that means to destabilize. And we're talking about individuals and families with, a whole range, of kids and people with a broad scope of needs.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So what do we expect to happen to our communities, our towns and cities when this starts happening?
Well, we already know there's deep concern being voiced by many towns and communities, and there have been, if folks have been, kind of watching the news or reading articles in their local papers, there have been town council meetings. There have been sort of community partners coming together to talk about this because they're very fearful careful and they're very concerned about everybody's well-being. There's, police departments are very concerned. All of the agencies and entities that provide services to people with disabilities and people with mental health challenges, are deeply concerned because this is going to be so destabilizing for hundreds and hundreds of people. And of course, churches and synagogues in areas of the state wind up, kind of picking up the slack. And they're already, we know of some congregations that are already like housing people in different parts of the state, and they are not going to have expanded capacity to do that. So this will put a strain on, on the service sector and on police forces, on the emergency rooms potentially in all of the hospitals. Or any kind of emergency services. So it really truly is, a statewide and a local crisis. This is very real.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we've been using the term crisis, and some people may think that's overstating it, but it really isn't.
It is not.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, we've been following very closely the process in the legislative session, right? So, we're not going to go into too much detail for the folks at home. I mean, all the seeing how the sausage is made, right? But we do want to share a little bit about what kind of the back and forth and what what the different proposals have been to help people understand where we are now. So actually the House did have in the original budget that they were working on additional funds for the emergency housing program, and the governor's budget did not have that though, and in conversations with the Senate, the House had to kind of back off because they took the stance that this kind of one-time federal money should not be used for ongoing programs. Which I guess there's some logic to that. We want our lawmakers to be fiscally responsible, but we have to set priorities about what do we want to spend our money on, right? And so sending people, especially families with children, out and just expecting them to kind of figure it out themselves is really not humane or moral, in our opinion, right? As people of faith. So what happened then was the budget got passed by both chambers, and because the version of the budget was slightly different, the way our system works, they have a conference committee, and that's made up of 3 people from the House, 3 people from the Senate.
Right.
They get together, so we follow that. Good thing about the pandemic too is that now everything's recorded,
on
right?
Zoom.
That's right.
You can watch everything. You can sit all day and stare at your TV and watch the legislative committees, your computer screen. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
Your phone.
Yeah, that's right. You can. Hopefully you don't do that. But we did some of that, right? And we were watching what the discussions were. And so that there was a presentation from the House about adding $12.5 million to the budget. Now, unfortunately, though, that money is it's woefully inadequate. But also it was geared more towards like staff, like human services staff, and mental health and substance use disorder staff, all of which is good, but it was to try to kind of provide support and guidance to people to try to figure out how they're going to find their own housing, right? And the governor has said repeatedly that, when we've, actually said there's no plan, the only plan is to kick people out. The governor and his administration have said, the plan is to help people. We're meeting, we have staff to sit down with every single person and provide them assistance. What's your personal reaction to
provide
to
them assistance, but not provide them with an actual place to go? So I think the very frustrating thing, for me and I think for a lot of folks is that, we have been in this pandemic mode for 3 years now. Now, of course, the first 8 months or so, we were, in total crisis mode, and there was very little coordination. But we've had a long time for the administration to do some work to really, think about this problem in a more thoughtful, long-term, coordinated way, and to put some staff in place, at the state level to really, create a coordinated response, to think about this, and have people dedicated to that work. And that has not happened, or it's been, again, woefully inadequate. So it's been left to all of those local agencies to kind of scramble and try to figure things out on their own, which I think we have to give them some credit for doing the best that they can to try to help people and to provide that kind of case management and that kind of support. But again, it's not actual space. So at this point, I think these House members are trying to have more conversation about what to do and what might be their response to, now that the actual budget for fiscal year 24 has passed both the House and the Senate, and it's been sent to the governor's desk. The governor has said that he wants to veto the budget. Not specifically to do with the dollars in there for housing, but just it is a historically very large budget with a lot of dollars for a lot of very worthy things that need to be addressed in our state. Housing being one of them, affordable housing, childcare, the energy crisis. There are so many concerns that we've been facing and that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So the budget has a lot of worthy things in it, but it is letting slide the needs of these, potentially 2,000 or more individuals who are going to be struggling, which we just don't see as a moral thing or a ethical response from our state leaders, from leadership.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, well said. There are a lot of great things in the budget. But again, it's a matter of making of priorities and of addressing emergencies and crises rather than sort of adding new programs. And again, I want to stress that what we're asking for would be temporary. It's not
short term,
interim. It's a short term, right? Stopgap measure until some of this new housing can be built. So, and another thing that's been kind of disturbing is some of the response has been, there's actually I never thought I would live to see this in legislation, but there's actually in the bill talking about money for handing out tents and camping equipment to people, so this is what we've come to. Yeah, and I guess people can do that in the summer and maybe even into the fall, but when we get into a Vermont winter, you're not going to want to camp outside.
Well, we're talking about meeting people's basic needs.
Yes,
just, humanely in our current society, such as it is, is that going to meet the needs of individuals who are struggling, or of a family who is trying to figure out, how to feed and house and educate their children, and take care of themselves, identify jobs, transportation, address mental health needs, address their medical needs, giving them a tent, really?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, it's just, it seems like we can do better.
It seems like we can do better.
We can do better, yeah. So we like the help of folks at home, right? We have volunteers who've been in touch with a lot of our legislators, and we did a campaign where we had people from our congregations calling the governor's office for a solid week. But we need people to jump in to do that kind of thing now, right? So
Yes, we do.
So I think our friends here at the station can put on screen if you go to the legislative website, you can look up your own legislator. They like to hear, they respond more to their direct constituents. So, so please go to legislature.vermont.gov and find their email address and email them or try to call them. And then also calling the governor's office. That number is now on your screen, 828-3333. And sometimes you get a live person and sometimes you get a machine, but you can also express your dismay at the way our unhoused neighbors are being treated, Vermonters being treated.
And you can make a really simple statement. You don't have to have all the details or all the numbers. You can just express your deep concern and frustration about the way Vermont is treating these individuals and families at this point in time.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, it is, if you're a political wonk, it is kind of an interesting point where we are now because, as you said, the budget has passed both chambers. So it's gone to the governor. The governor has said previously that he is going to veto it for other reasons because there are other things in it he doesn't like. So that means that then there will be an override session. They call it. The legislature's already scheduled that for the end of June. It's June 20th through the 22nd. And that means that people who would ordinarily, we've talked a lot about how the Democrats and the progressives together have super majorities in both chambers, which means that they have enough votes, theoretically, if everyone votes the same way, they have enough votes to override the governor, any veto of anything, if they all hang together. But I know we've talked to a lot of legislators personally now and been in contact with them, and many of them are really feeling caught between a rock and a hard place. They're trying to decide what they can do, and I know that they're having conversations kind of behind the scenes, and many of them are trying to come up with new ideas, fresh ideas about how to handle this. But because if they did sustain the governor's veto, not override it, then we'd be back at the governor's, as I understand it, at the governor's original budget proposals, which means that some of the programs that the Democrats and the progressives really wanted to see happen would be in jeopardy. So they're really trying to weigh, what can be done. The budget only got 90 votes in the original vote just last week in the House, which is not, they need 101 to override a veto. So obviously they're a little short of that. So it's going to be an interesting time. If you like to follow this kind of thing in politics, it's interesting from that point of view. But of course, if you're a person who's about to be kicked out on the street and who's losing their housing, it's not a game. It's not something to a spectator sport. It's something that really affects you deeply and personally. Yeah. So we'll keep watching this to see what happens.
And I don't think we can predict because we really don't know exactly how this all is going to play out. But we encourage folks, at home also, if this topic engages you and you're as concerned as many of us are, that you will follow it as well, and hopefully also follow up with calls to the governor and to your legislators.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and we are hoping that, long term, that I think everybody in Vermont now agrees we have a big problem with affordable housing, not only for people at the lowest income levels, but on up into our middle income levels. It's affecting attracting people to the state to work in jobs that we need for them to do. It's having all kinds of impacts on our state, and so we are we're glad that long-term more units of housing are coming up. But we alluded to this earlier. We do hope that this will kind of shake shake our lawmakers up in the executive branch and the legislative branch to say maybe we need to kind of rethink some of the structure about how we make these decisions too, because right now some of it's in the Agency of Human Services, some of it's in the Agency of Community Development, some of it's under the auspices of the Vermont Housing Conservation Board. So it's all over the place,
spread out.
Yeah, and we hope that there will be some some examination of how decisions are made also. So at any rate, we hope folks at home have found this informative and interesting. It's certainly kind of up to date information, and I thank you, Amy, so much for being here and so that we could have this discussion and share what we know.
Yeah. Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah, and please do make those calls. This is the governor's office, the number again, and check that website out to contact your legislators as well. This is a very important time in the life of a lot of Vermonters. So thanks very much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And check out Vermont Interfaith Action's website also if we work on other issues as well. If you'd like to get more involved in our work, viavt.org. And we're always happy to have, you don't have to belong to a congregation to join with us to try to make systemic change on issues of social justice. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.